And there's other markers like iron saturation can be helpful too, because that tells you how, saturated the cells are. And then also things like binding proteins, those tend to do the opposite. So those tend to go up when iron goes down. So, because think about it, think of iron binding proteins as like fingers, right? The more, or hands, right? The more hungry you are, the more hands you have reaching out to grab stuff, right? And so your body creates these proteins and will try to reach out and grab all this extra iron. So it creates more binding proteins when iron is lower, because it's trying to get as much of that iron into the cell as possible. Does that make sense out of
Wow.
the gates?
Yeah, it's a great breakdown. The analogy is super helpful because, some of the blood chemistry training that you and I've looked at, some of the doctors, they will talk about the importance of ferritin, but that visualization of the gas tank makes a whole lot of sense because you'll have doctors, if they do recognize the low iron, they'll treat that. But then if you see low ferritin, the woman still doesn't have the results she's looking for in regards to hair loss and catching her breath and all of that. So once you get the ferritin levels up, which typically I go for lactoferrin, what are you doing in terms of trying to get ferritin back up? I know optimizing the gut is some of it. We can talk about that, but what about just straight supplement?
So first thing is, you may see higher levels of iron in women that may have low iron. So you have to look at all the markers, like I mentioned, because if they're inflamed, iron is it's also like a reactive oxygen species, right? Think of it as like it's kind of flammable, if you will. And so when you're inflamed because of poor food or diet issues or toxicity issues, you may have high levels of iron or ferritin because of inflammation. So if you're really inflamed, I always like to make sure we calm inflammation down a little bit first before we throw iron in there. It's like gasoline in the fire. So you really want to make sure, if iron's really high or looks really high, and then we see some inflammation markers like CRP also high, we're seeing a lot of symptoms, right? Brain fog, joint pain, energy issues. Maybe we wait a little bit before we jump on that iron train right away. Maybe we just do some iron rich foods, on the animal side, and work on getting the inflammation down. So it depends upon where they're at.
That's
If they're,
smart. Let me
yeah,
comment on that real quick. That's really smart and really wise of you to say, because a lot of people will just go jump on the iron train, right? Those doctor will prescribe them an iron, which is probably a really low quality form, which is going to create constipation and other problems. And if they were already having high iron due to inflammation, due to some sort of toxicity, that makes them worse. I had high iron when I first got exposed to mold. I actually looked back at some of my old levels. My ferritin was high, the iron was high, and then I did some pretty high potency turmeric extract, and I was able to get the iron back down. I'm sure the blood donations may have helped too, but it was interesting to see that on paper, how my exposure to toxicity cranked that up a little bit.
exactly. And then also there's a marker called ceruloplasmin, which is a marker for copper. So sometimes copper can also affect iron as well. Again, I'm not too worried about copper if you're like paleo and you're eating high quality organic meats and high quality animal products, because you're going to typically see high quality zinc and iron products tend to also have copper in there too. So I don't typically get worried about copper being low unless we're really, I don't know, eating a lot of plant-based products and we're kind of deficient in some of those minerals. And so if we're eating good quality animal products, probably not that big of a deal. And then also it's good to look at when we're doing iron, if someone's vegan or vegetarian, there's different kinds of iron that we'll use, right? And so in my line, I have a product called Iron Supreme, which is an iron bisglycinate, which is bound to glycine, which is good. It's better than like the conventional medicine, which is ferrous sulfate, which tends to be more constipating, leave the stool a lot blacker and darker. The ferrous bisglycinate tends to be pretty well absorbed. So I like that. It's bound to glycine, which is the same kind of amino acid in collagen or bone broth. So I like that. Also, I would say you can, depending on if they're vegan, vegetarian, we may even want to add in just some grass-fed liver, something like that, that's going to have some other nutrients like B12 and vitamin A in there as well. So it just depends upon how good or bad someone's diet is too, and if they can eat animal products.